Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour watching the massive alien ships hanging in space above Earth like dark clouds before a storm. The ships were huge beyond anything humans had ever built, and their black metal surfaces seemed to absorb light itself, making them look like holes cut into the stars. Jake had been a commander in the Earth Defense Force for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment when humanity would meet beings from another world. Dr. Lisa Martinez worked at her station nearby, running scans on the alien vessels, with equipment that seemed pathetically primitive compared to what they were looking at. She was the best xenobiologist on Earth, but had only theoretical knowledge about alien life until today. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to get readings through the strange energy fields surrounding the ships. Captain Ryan Brooks stood ready at the tactical station, though his weapons would be useless against technology so far advanced beyond human understanding. The aliens had arrived 3 days ago without warning and without any attempt at communication. They simply appeared in Earth orbit, using technology that allowed them to travel faster than light, while humanity was still struggling to maintain colonies on Mars and the outer moons. The silence from the alien fleet was more terrifying than any threat could have been as Earth waited to learn the fate of the human race. President Maria Santos had ordered Jake to lead the first contact mission, though everyone knew it was likely a suicide run. The Endeavour was Earth's most advanced starship, but compared to the alien vessels, it looked like a rowboat approaching an aircraft carrier. Jake accepted the mission because someone had to try, and he had spent his career protecting humanity from threats, though none had ever been as overwhelming as this. The communication system crackled to life with a signal from the alien fleet, and Jake felt his heart rate increase as he prepared to hear the voice of another species for the first time in human history. The voice that came through was deep and mechanical, speaking perfect English, which meant the aliens had been studying Earth for some time before revealing themselves. High Admiral Vexithar identified himself as the commander of the Zephyrian Empire. Fleet and his words carried the weight of absolute authority as he explained that humanity had been evaluated and found to be a primitive species barely worth the attention of the galactic community. The Zephyrians had watched human wars and conflicts for decades and concluded that humans were weak, divided creatures who fought each other instead of working together. Jake listened as Vexthar offered Earth a simple choice that was really no choice at all. Humanity could submit to become a vassal world of the Zephyrian Empire and serve their new masters, or Earth would be destroyed and the human species would be eliminated from the galaxy. The Admiral spoke as if he was discussing the weather rather than the extinction of an entire civilization, showing how little value he placed on human life. Lisa continued her scans and whispered to Jake that the alien ships showed power readings, unlike anything in human science, and their shields could probably withstand nuclear weapons without damage. Ryan reported that Earth's defense satellites had been disabled by some kind of energy pulse the moment the aliens arrived, and every military installation on the planet was now helpless against attack. The aliens gave humanity 24 hours to decide their fate. But Vexthar made it clear that resistance would be futile and would only result in more suffering for the human race. He transmitted images of other worlds the Zephyrians had conquered, showing cities turned to glass and populations enslaved or eliminated as examples of what happened to species that refused to submit. Jake opened a channel to Earth and spoke with President Santos, who was meeting with the United Earth Council to discuss their response, though everyone knew there was really only one option if humanity wanted to survive. The military leaders on Earth confirmed that they had no weapons capable of penetrating alien defenses and no ships fast enough to escape if the aliens decided to pursue retreating forces. Dr. Martinez made one disturbing discovery during her scans, as she detected that the aliens were not just studying Earth's defenses, but were also analyzing human biology and psychology through sensors more advanced than anything humanity could imagine. The Zephyrians were not just conquering Earth, but were learning everything about what made humans tick so they could control them more effectively. As the 24-hour deadline approached, Jake realized that humanity was about to enter a new age where they would no longer be masters of their own destiny, but would become servants of an alien empire that saw them as nothing more than useful animals. The stars that had once represented hope and exploration for humanity now looked down on a species that was about to lose everything they had ever worked to achieve. The communication ended, and Jake stared out at the alien fleet, knowing that tomorrow, Earth would belong to the Zephyrian Empire, and humanity would begin learning what it meant to be the slaves of a superior civilization that had traveled across the galaxy to claim their world. 6 months had passed since the Zephyrian Empire took control of Earth, and Amy Parker crouched in the ruins of what used to be downtown Chicago, watching alien patrols move through streets that once belonged to humans. The occupation had been swift and complete, with Zephyrian forces establishing control over every major city on the planet, while human governments were reduced to puppet organizations that followed alien orders without question. Lieutenant Colonel Parker had been serving at a military base in Colorado when the invasion began, but now she led a small group of resistance fighters who lived in abandoned buildings and subway tunnels, trying to avoid the sensors that the aliens had placed throughout the city. Her team included Danny Rodriguez, who had been a Marine before the world changed, and Katie Walsh, an engineer who understood how to modify human technology to work against alien systems. The Zephyrians had made their intentions clear from the beginning, as they established massive orbital stations above Earth that could destroy any target on the surface with energy beams that turned matter into glowing plasma. Human military forces surrendered without firing a shot when they realized their weapons could not even scratch alien shields, and their planes fell from the sky when alien technology disabled their engines. Ben Carter sat at a jury-rigged computer terminal in their underground hideout trying to hack into Zephyrian communication networks, though his success had been limited because alien technology operated on principles that human science barely understood. He had been the best computer expert in the old world, but now he struggled to understand systems that seemed to think for themselves and adapted to resist his attempts at intrusion. Amy remembered the day when President Santos announced Earth's surrender in a broadcast that was transmitted simultaneously to every screen and radio on the planet as Zephyrian ships filled the sky above major cities. The aliens had demonstrated their power by disabling every satellite in orbit and shutting down power grids across entire continents before turning the systems back on to show they could control human technology at will. The resistance movement had started small with individual acts of defiance, but gradually grew as people realized that the aliens viewed humans as nothing more than useful animals who could be worked to death and replaced when they broke down. Amy had been contacted by similar groups around the world, including fighters led by Tony Blake in Australia and Claire Morrison in Europe, who were all struggling to find ways to hurt an enemy with superior technology. Dr. Lisa Martinez worked in a Zephyrian research facility where she was forced to help aliens study human biology and psychology so they could better control the population, but she secretly gathered intelligence about alien weaknesses that she passed to resistance groups through hidden messages. She had discovered that the Zephyrians relied heavily on centralized control systems and had never fought an enemy that used guerrilla tactics or unconventional warfare. The aliens had underestimated human adaptability and resourcefulness because they came from a civilization where technology solved every problem, and individual initiative was discouraged in favor of following orders from superior officers. They expected humans to behave like other conquered species who accepted defeat and settled into lives as obedient servants, but they did not understand the human capacity for stubborn resistance. Danny Rodriguez had organized raids on alien supply, convoys using weapons salvaged from abandoned military bases, but their success was limited because Zephyrian vehicles were protected by energy shields that deflected bullets and explosives. The aliens seemed almost amused by human attacks and often allowed resistance fighters to escape rather than waste time hunting them down because they considered humans to be no real threat. Katie Walsh spent her time studying captured alien equipment, trying to understand how their technology worked and looking for vulnerabilities that human fighters could exploit. She had made some progress in understanding their power systems, but the complexity of alien science made it difficult to develop countermeasures using the limited resources available to the resistance. Amy established contact with other resistance cells through a network of hidden radio transmitters that used frequencies the aliens seemed to ignore because they considered human communication technology to be primitive and harmless. The coordination between different groups was slow and dangerous, but gradually they began sharing information about alien patrol patterns and weak points in their control systems. The Zephyrians had established themselves in the most comfortable locations on Earth while avoiding areas with extreme weather or difficult terrain because their equipment was designed for the stable conditions on their home world. This gave the Resistance opportunities to operate in mountains, forests, and underground areas where alien forces were reluctant to go because their technology did not work as well in challenging environments. Ben Carter achieved his first major success when he managed to temporarily disrupt communications between an alien command post and its patrol units, causing confusion that allowed Resistance fighters to escape from what should have been a trap. The incident was small, but it proved that alien systems could be attacked if humans learned to think differently about technology and warfare. Amy realized that the key to fighting the Zephyrians was not to match their technology, but to use human advantages like creativity, unpredictability, and the ability to operate in conditions that the comfort-loving aliens tried to avoid. The Resistance would have to become something the aliens had never encountered before if humanity was going to have any chance of survival. As winter approached, Amy watched snow begin to fall on the ruins of Chicago and smiled because she knew the aliens hated cold weather and would reduce their patrols during the harsh months ahead, giving the Resistance time to plan and prepare for larger operations against an enemy that had not yet realized how dangerous humans could become when they had nothing left to lose. Major Steve Collins studied maps of Zephyrian positions from his hidden base in the Rocky Mountains, where winter snow provided cover from alien sensors that seemed to have trouble detecting human activity in extreme cold conditions. He had been an Air Force strategist before the invasion, and now he worked to develop new tactics that could exploit the weaknesses that Dr. Lisa Martinez had discovered in alien technology and thinking patterns. The scattered resistance groups had begun coordinating their efforts through a network of radio communications that used old military frequencies the aliens ignored because they considered human technology to be too primitive to pose any threat. Amy Parker in Chicago had shared intelligence about alien patrol patterns, while Tony Blake in Australia reported that Zephyrian forces avoided operating in desert heat that damaged their equipment. Lisa Martinez had managed to transmit critical information about Zephyrian vulnerabilities through coded messages hidden in routine reports she was forced to file at the research facility where aliens studied human behavior and biology. She revealed that alien technology, while advanced, had never been tested against guerrilla warfare tactics because the Zephyrian Empire conquered worlds through overwhelming force rather than fighting prolonged campaigns against determined resistance. Steve realized that humans needed to stop thinking like conventional military forces and start acting like the insurgent fighters who had frustrated larger armies throughout human history. The Zephyrians expected their enemies to fight, using organized units with clear command structures and predictable tactics, but humans could be much more flexible and unpredictable if they abandoned traditional military thinking. Rachel Thompson had been a pilot before the invasion, and now she led daring raids using aircraft modified to fly below Zephyrian sensor networks by following terrain features and using electromagnetic interference from natural sources like thunderstorms. Her success rate was improving as she learned to think like a hunter rather than a fighter pilot, and her small plane could strike alien positions before disappearing into landscape features that confused alien tracking systems. Katie Walsh had been working on crude but effective electromagnetic pulse devices built from salvaged electronics that could temporarily disable Zephyrian systems if delivered close enough to their targets. The weapons were dangerous to build and unreliable to use, but they gave humans brief windows of opportunity when alien shields and sensors went offline, allowing conventional weapons to do damage. Ben Carter achieved his first major breakthrough when he successfully hacked into a Zephyrian communication hub by using human intuition and pattern recognition rather than trying to understand alien programming logic. The attack caused chaos in their command structure, as orders became scrambled and patrol units received conflicting instructions that sent them to wrong locations or caused them to fire on each other. The success of the communication hack proved that alien systems had vulnerabilities that could be exploited by humans who thought differently about technology and problem-solving. The Zephyrians had built their networks to resist attacks from other advanced civilizations, but they had not considered the possibility of infiltration by a species that used creativity and intuition rather than pure logic. Danny Rodriguez led ground attacks using tactics learned from urban warfare that took advantage of human knowledge about local terrain and building layouts, while aliens struggled to navigate through environments designed by and for human occupants. His teams used sewers, maintenance tunnels, and abandoned buildings to move through cities without being detected by sensors that were designed to track movement in open spaces. Amy Parker coordinated between different resistance cells and began planning larger operations that would require multiple groups working together to overwhelm alien defenses through simultaneous attacks from unexpected directions. The Zephyrians had stationed their forces to control major population centers, but they had not prepared for attacks coming from areas they considered too difficult or dangerous to occupy. Claire Morrison in Europe had discovered that Zephyrian equipment failed in extreme cold, and her teams began operating during winter storms when alien technology became unreliable and their forces retreated to heated shelters rather than maintain security patrols. The resistance learned to use weather and terrain as weapons against an enemy that was accustomed to fighting in controlled conditions. Lisa Martinez reported that aliens were becoming frustrated and confused by human resistance because their previous conquests had involved civilizations that accepted defeat once their main military forces were destroyed. The Zephyrians did not understand how to fight an enemy that had no central command structure and could continue operating even after suffering major losses. Steve Collins realized that the key to victory was not to beat the aliens in direct combat, but to make the occupation so costly and difficult that they would eventually decide Earth was not worth the effort required to maintain control. Human resistance needed to become a constant drain on Zephyrian resources, while demonstrating that humans would never stop fighting no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. The first coordinated attack came when Ben Carter disabled communications, while Rachel Thompson struck from the air and Danny Rodriguez attacked from underground tunnels, all hitting the same alien facility within minutes of each other. The Zephyrians were caught completely off guard, and for the first time since the invasion, humans achieved a clear tactical victory against superior technology. As news of the successful attack spread through resistance networks around the world, human fighters began to believe that victory might be possible if they continued learning and adapting their tactics to exploit alien weaknesses. The Zephyrians were no longer seen as invincible conquerors, but as an enemy that could be hurt if humans were clever enough and determined enough to keep fighting. High Admiral Vexthar stared at reports of increasing human resistance activities from his command ship orbiting Earth and felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest, which was genuine concern about the outcome of a military campaign. The humans were not behaving like other species the Zephyrian Empire had conquered, and their resistance was growing stronger rather than weaker as time passed since the initial occupation. The Admiral ordered the destruction of several human cities, as examples to show the population what happened to those who supported resistance activities, but the brutal attacks only seemed to increase human determination to fight rather than intimidating them into submission. Captain Ryan Brooks, who had been secretly gathering intelligence from within the puppet government, reported that each Zephyrian atrocity drove more humans to join the underground resistance movements. Amy Parker received communications from resistance. Cells around the world reporting that their ranks were swelling with new recruits who had lost everything to alien brutality and had decided they would rather die fighting than live as slaves under Zephyrian rule. The occupation forces found themselves facing attacks in locations where no resistance had existed before as ordinary humans picked up weapons and began striking at alien positions. Dr. Lisa Martinez completed her analysis of Zephyrian technology and made a discovery that could change the course of the war if the resistance could act on the information she had gathered. The aliens relied on quantum entanglement for faster-than-light communication, which allowed them to coordinate their vast empire across galactic distances, but this system had a critical vulnerability that humans might be able to exploit. Steve Collins studied the intelligence that Lisa had provided and realized that if the resistance could disrupt the quantum communication network, the Zephyrians would lose their ability to coordinate with other parts of their empire and would be isolated on Earth, without reinforcements or new orders from their high command. The plan would require simultaneous attacks on communication facilities around the globe, but it might be possible if all resistance groups worked together. Ben Carter spent weeks preparing for what they called Operation Blackout, which would target every Zephyrian communication facility on Earth at the same moment to prevent the aliens from adapting their defenses or calling for help from other parts of their empire. The timing would have to be perfect, because the aliens would realize what was happening after the first few facilities went offline. Amy Parker coordinated with resistance leaders on every continent to ensure their teams would be ready to strike, at exactly the same time using whatever weapons and tactics were available in their regions. Tony Blake in Australia would use explosives, while Claire Morrison in Europe planned electromagnetic pulse attacks, and Danny Rodriguez would lead tunnel assaults in major cities across North America. Rachel Thompson prepared modified aircraft for strikes against orbital communication relays that connected ground facilities with Zephyrian ships in space, while Katie Walsh completed work on improved electromagnetic weapons that could penetrate alien shields if brought close enough to their targets. Every resistance fighter on Earth understood that this operation would either cripple the occupation or result in the complete destruction of human resistance. Lisa Martinez used her position in the research facility to identify the exact locations of quantum communication nodes and provided detailed intelligence about their defenses and vulnerabilities to resistance teams that would carry out the attacks. She knew that her role in the operation would be discovered afterward, but she was willing to sacrifice herself if it meant giving humanity a chance to fight back effectively. The operation began at midnight Greenwich Mean Time, when resistance fighters around the world attacked Zephyrian communication facilities using every tactic they had learned during months of guerrilla warfare. Explosions lit up the night sky as human teams struck targets that the aliens had considered secure, while Ben Carter launched cyber attacks that crashed alien computer networks. The quantum communication system began failing as critical nodes went offline faster than Zephyrian technicians could repair or reroute the connections, and within hours the alien forces on Earth found themselves cut off from their empire and unable to coordinate their response to the massive human assault. Individual alien units began making tactical errors as they lost contact with their command structure. Vexthar watched his communication network collapse and realized for the first time that the humans might actually be capable of defeating Zephyrian forces through tactics that no other species had ever used against the Empire. The aliens had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy that fought with such creativity and determination, while refusing to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. Captain Brooks transmitted intelligence from the puppet government showing that isolated Zephyrian commanders were panicking as they lost contact with their superiors and began making desperate decisions that exposed their forces to human attacks. The resistance had succeeded in turning the aliens' greatest strength into a weakness by destroying their ability to coordinate their advanced technology. Amy Parker led her teams in a series of attacks against confused and isolated alien positions, while Danny Rodriguez emerged from tunnels to strike at facilities that were no longer protected by coordinated defenses. For the first time since the invasion began, humans were winning significant battles against Zephyrian forces and driving the occupation troops back from areas they had controlled for months. Steve Collins realized that Operation Blackout had achieved more than anyone had hoped, because it not only disrupted alien communications, but also demonstrated to humans around the world that the Zephyrians could be beaten if people were willing to work together and use their natural advantages against an enemy that had become dependent on technology rather than tactical thinking. As reports of successful attacks came in from resistance groups around the globe, Amy Parker understood that the war had entered a new phase where humans were no longer just surviving, but were actually fighting back effectively against an alien empire that had underestimated the determination and resourcefulness of the human species. Commander Jake Sullivan stood in the reformed command center of the Earth Defense Force, watching tactical displays that showed human forces advancing against Zephyrian positions for the first time since the invasion began, and he felt something that had been missing for months, which was hope for humanity's future. The success of Operation Blackout had proven that aliens could be defeated if humans used their natural advantages instead of trying to match superior technology. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any conventional rules of warfare, as human resistance fighters operated in conditions that terrified the occupation forces who had never encountered opponents willing to fight in underground tunnels. Extreme weather and urban environments turned into deadly mazes. Sergeant Lisa Chen led teams through New York's subway system, using maintenance tunnels and abandoned stations to strike at alien positions before disappearing back into the underground network. Lieutenant Paul Jenkins coordinated mountain warfare in the Himalayas, where Zephyrian equipment failed in thin air and extreme cold, while human fighters who had grown up in harsh conditions moved through terrain that aliens considered impossible to navigate. The occupation forces had been trained to fight civilized galactic powers with predictable military doctrines, but they struggled against human innovation and refusal to accept defeat. Dr. Lisa Martinez now worked openly with the resistance after her role in Operation Blackout was discovered, and she began reverse engineering Zephyrian technology to create human-operated versions of alien energy weapons and defensive systems. More importantly, she had learned how to disrupt alien personal shields using specific electromagnetic frequencies that human weapons could generate with modifications to existing equipment. Danny Rodriguez led teams that developed suicide drones, from household electronics and improvised explosives that could penetrate Zephyrian armor by attacking weak points that aliens had never thought to protect, because no previous enemy had been desperate enough to use such unconventional tactics. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was significant, as they realized humans would sacrifice themselves to achieve tactical objectives. Katie Walsh created new weapons using salvaged alien technology combined with human engineering that produced results the Zephyrians had not anticipated because they assumed humans lacked the technical knowledge to modify advanced systems. Her electromagnetic pulse grenades could disable alien equipment at close range, while her modified projectile weapons could punch through shields that had been designed to stop energy-based attacks. Amy Parker coordinated resistance activities across multiple continents and realized that humans were winning not because they had better technology, but because they approached problems differently than any species the Zephyrians had encountered before. Human persistence and refusal to surrender was demoralizing alien forces who had expected Earth to be an easy conquest that would boost their empire's confidence. The aliens had conquered worlds through technological superiority and overwhelming force. But they had never faced an enemy that grew stronger through adversity and learned to turn weakness into strength through creativity and determination. Ben Carter continued his cyber warfare operations against alien systems that had been designed to resist logical attacks but were vulnerable to human intuition and pattern recognition. Tony Blake reported from Australia that Zephyrian forces were abandoning remote outposts and concentrating in major cities where they felt safer from human attacks, but this strategy only made them easier targets for coordinated resistance operations. Claire Morrison led European resistance fighters who had learned to use industrial facilities and transportation networks as weapons against occupation forces who did not understand human infrastructure. Rachel Thompson expanded her aerial operations, using modified aircraft that could penetrate alien defenses by flying in patterns that confused sensors designed to track conventional military vehicles, while her pilots used terrain following techniques that aliens had never encountered. The success of these unconventional tactics proved that human creativity was more valuable than advanced technology in actual combat situations. Steve Collins developed new strategies that exploited the psychological weaknesses of Zephyrian forces, who had become dependent on their technology and had lost the ability to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Human fighters learned to create chaos and confusion that prevented aliens from using their superior equipment effectively while forcing them to make tactical errors. Captain Ryan Brooks provided intelligence showing that Zephyrian morale was collapsing as individual units found themselves isolated and under constant attack by an enemy they could not predict or understand, while their casualties mounted and their equipment broke down under conditions it had not been designed to handle. The aliens had expected to fight a conventional war, but instead found themselves trapped in a nightmare of guerrilla warfare. Lisa Martinez made breakthrough discoveries about Zephyrian biology that revealed they were physically and psychologically unprepared for the stress of prolonged combat against an adaptive enemy, and many alien soldiers were suffering from what humans would recognize as combat fatigue and post-traumatic stress disorders. The Zephyrians had conquered other worlds so quickly that they had never developed the mental toughness needed for extended warfare. Jake Sullivan realized that humanity's greatest weapon was not any piece of technology, but their refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds, combined with their ability to find new solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable. The aliens had made the mistake of judging human capabilities based on their technology, rather than understanding the human spirit that drove them to keep fighting no matter what the cost. As winter approached, Amy Parker watched human forces preparing for a final offensive against the remaining Zephyrian strongholds, and she knew that victory was within reach because the aliens had finally learned what it meant to face an enemy that would never stop fighting and would never accept defeat, regardless of how advanced their conquerors might be. Captain Ryan Brooks transmitted the most important intelligence of the entire war when he discovered the location of the main Zephyrian command ship hidden on the dark side of the moon, where High Admiral Vexathar was preparing to call for reinforcements from the home fleet that would arrive to crush human resistance before it could spread to other parts of the galaxy. The discovery meant that humanity had only one chance to end the war before facing an enemy force too large to defeat. Commander Jake Sullivan studied the intelligence reports and realized that a direct assault on the lunar base would require every available human fighter and all the tactical knowledge they had gained during months of guerrilla warfare against an enemy that still possessed superior technology and defensive advantages. The mission would be desperate and dangerous, but it represented humanity's last hope for freedom. Amy Parker assembled her best urban warfare specialists, while Steve Collins brought mountain fighters who had learned to operate in extreme conditions. And Danny Rodriguez selected tunnel combat experts who could navigate through maintenance systems that aliens had never thought to defend. Dr. Lisa Martinez provided technical support teams equipped with modified alien weapons and electromagnetic pulse devices that could disable Zephyrian shields. The assault force traveled to the moon using captured alien transport ships that Ben Carter had reprogrammed to respond to human control systems, while Rachel Thompson led fighter escorts using modified aircraft equipped with alien energy weapons that could penetrate space-worthy defenses. The approach had to be perfect, because once the attack began, there would be no possibility of retreat or rescue. Jake Sullivan felt the weight of humanity's future as his ships approached the hidden base that represented the last major Zephyrian stronghold in the solar system, and he knew that failure would mean the end of human resistance and the beginning of permanent slavery under alien rule. The defenders would fight desperately because they understood that losing the command ship would cut them off from their empire forever. Tony Blake led the first assault wave through maintenance tunnels that aliens had considered too small for military use, while Katie Walsh disabled defensive systems using electromagnetic weapons that had been designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrian technology. The defenders were caught off guard by humans attacking through areas they had assumed were secure. Ben Carter launched cyber attacks against the base computer systems, while Claire Morrison led teams that captured critical control rooms before aliens could coordinate their defensive response, and the battle became a series of close-quarters fights where human determination and willingness to accept casualties gave them advantages over enemies who had never faced such desperate tactics. The fighting was fierce, as Zephyrian technology proved its superiority in direct combat, but human adaptability and tactical flexibility allowed resistance fighters to overcome alien defenses through creativity and sacrifice, while alien soldiers struggled to respond to unconventional attacks from unexpected directions. Paul Jenkins led mountain warfare specialists who used rappelling techniques to attack from above, while Lisa Chen brought tunnel fighters who emerged from below. High Admiral Vexthar found himself trapped in his command center as human forces, closed in from all directions using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare while refusing to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming firepower from alien weapons that should have been sufficient to stop any assault. The Admiral realized too late that he had completely misunderstood the nature of human determination. Jake Sullivan confronted Vexithar in the final battle and captured the alien commander alive after a fight that demonstrated the difference between technology and willpower, while proving that superior weapons meant nothing when facing an enemy that refused to surrender regardless of the odds. The capture of the Zephyrian leader marked the end of organized alien resistance in the solar system. Under interrogation, Vexthar revealed a truth that shocked everyone who heard it, because the Zephyrian Empire had been declining for centuries, and relied on fear and reputation rather than actual military strength to maintain control over conquered worlds. They had chosen Earth specifically because they thought humans would be easy to conquer and would provide a morale boost for their failing empire that was losing wars on multiple fronts. The revelation spread throughout the galaxy via the restored communication network as other subjugated species learned that the mighty Zephyrian Empire was actually weak and vulnerable to determined resistance from populations willing to fight unconventional wars against superior technology. Rebellions began on dozens of worlds as aliens who had seemed invincible suddenly appeared vulnerable to species they had oppressed. Dr. Martinez transmitted detailed information about Zephyrian weaknesses to resistance movements across the galaxy, while Ben Carter helped establish communication networks that allowed conquered species to coordinate their efforts against an empire that had depended on keeping its subjects isolated and afraid. The human victory became the spark that ignited a galactic revolution. Amy Parker stood in the captured command center watching reports of successful rebellions from across the galaxy and realized that humanity had not only won their freedom, but had become leaders in a new alliance of former Zephyrian subjects who were working together to create a more just galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. Jake Sullivan looked out at Earth from the alien command ship that now served as humanity's first interstellar vessel, and reflected on how the war had transformed a species that aliens considered weak and divided into a galactic power whose greatest strength was their refusal to accept defeat. The Zephyrians had made their greatest mistake when they assumed that being alone in the universe meant being weak. Lisa Martinez joined Jake at the observation deck, and they watched the sun rise over Earth as free humans began the work of rebuilding their world while preparing to help other species achieve the same freedom that had cost so much to win. Humanity had learned that their isolation had not made them weak, but had forged them into the ultimate survivors who could overcome any challenge through determination, creativity, and the absolute refusal to give up hope.